Hi everyone, it's Kat here from Knit Cat Paddywhack. I share easy knitting tutorials for new knitters or people who want something quick and easy to knit. If this interests you, please consider subscribing. Today I've got a really easy tutorial for you. This is a super bulky baby beanie which is knit in the round. So it would be a pretty good first circular knitting project, I think, and it knits up really quickly. And the pattern is available for free on my blog, which I'll link in the description below. So this beanie I think would be a good size for a newborn to 3 months, maybe a little bit big for some brand newborns, but up to 3 months it stretches quite well. For this project you'll need a set of 4 9.5mm double pointed needles. Now these are hard to find, but these are ones that I made myself, and I have a tutorial video which I'll link in the description below as well, so that you can make your own super chunky knitting needles for about $3 Australian. The yarn I'm using is a nameless one that I found at a charity shop one day. It's a super bulky weight, and I found a few alternatives which I've linked in the description below. The tension or gauge for this project is going to be 8 stitches by 11 rows to 10 centimeters squared in stocking stitch. So as you can see, it's going to knit up really quickly. Because we'll be knitting in the round, the only stitch you'll need to know how to do for this project is the knit stitch. Other things you'll need for this project include a pom-pom of your choice. So I have made this one already. I actually, once I made it, I was like, not sure about the white. Kind of looks like a Santa hat, which wasn't my plan. So I've got this one, which is kind of like a dusty rose kind of colour, which I think will go a bit better. I'm liking these fake fur ones. They seem to be quite trendy at the moment. A pom-pom is of course optional, but it does add a cute little touch. You'll also need a small length of a thinner yarn in a similar colour to the yarn, the chunky yarn that you'll be using. So this is just some hand spun that I made years ago, which is a close match. Not perfect, but it doesn't matter, because you'll be using that yarn for the weaving in and attaching of the pom-pom. So you won't actually see it. But it's just, I think a thinner yarn is just a lot easier to work with than the really chunky yarn. You'll need a thick crochet hook. This is for weaving in the ends, which you will have to weave in from the cast on and the cast off edges of your beanie using the chunky yarn. So I find it a lot easier than using the tapestry needle for the chunky yarn. You'll need a tapestry needle for weaving in the ends to attach the pom-pom. You'll need a good pair of scissors, of course, and a row counter. And if you're wondering about the string, I usually wear this around my neck. So let's begin. So we're going to cast on 28 stitches. I would use a stretchy kind of cast on, so you could use backwards loop. If you're a brand new knitter, I'm going to be using a long tail cast on. So 28 stitches. Okay, now that I've cast on my 28 stitches, I need to join for working in the round. I thought I would show you guys how I do this, just in case you're new to circular knitting. So the way I do it is I actually will cast on one more stitch than I need. So I've now got 29 stitches on my needles. Take one needle out. I only do the long tail with 2 needles just to make sure it's not too tight. Now, so I need to divide this across 3 needles. So I have 28 stitches, which will be in the work, so that means 9 or 10 stitches per needle. So just slip them. We have to slip them purl-wise so they don't get twisted. So as if you're going to purl. So I got 10 on that one. Do 9 on this one. And I should have 10 on this one. Yeah, so I've got 10 on this one. So the way that I join to work in the round, there is more than one way to do it. But I got this method from Elizabeth Zimmerman's book, Knitting Without Tears. So what I do is I take my extra stitch that I cast on, put it onto the next needle, and then pass the previous stitch over the top. And I've got my working yarn there. So where the tail is, that's the start of your round. And you can put a marker there or a safety pin, but since we've got this tail, I don't think I'll bother. The next step is to work 14 rounds in stocking stitch, and that means for knitting in the round, that means just do the knit stitch for 14 rounds. Now when we get to a new needle in our circulation, we'll have our empty needle and that one becomes the working needle. And it's important to make sure that you're pulling the stitch from one needle to the next fairly tight so that you don't have a gap which kind of looks like a ladder up your work. So make sure it's fairly tight, nothing ridiculous. Just because there's always going to be like a little bit of tension between the two needles anyway, so if you can compensate by pulling it a little bit tighter, then that will keep your tension more even when you're knitting in the round. So I've worked my 14 rounds in just the knit stitch, which comes out as stocking stitch when you're knitting in the round. My next step is to decrease for the crown, and that is really easy. So we're going to start off by knitting 5 stitches. And then for the next 2 stitches we'll knit 2 together. So knit them as if they were just one stitch. And we do that all the way around for this row. So knit 5. And then knit 2 together. Now for the next round, instead of knitting 5 before the knit 2 together, we're just going to knit 4. So we'll knit 4. And knit 2 together. And as you can see, hopefully, you can see that the decreases that we're doing are stacked on top of each other, so we'll get a nice even line, slanted line of decreases. And if you've done hats before, you'll probably be familiar with this kind of decreasing, except with a row in between or a round in between that's just knit even. Because this is such a thick chunky yarn, we don't need to do that row in between. We can just decrease on every row. Okay, so I wanted to show you this bit. So I've just worked my 4 knit stitches and I have to do a knit 2 together, but I've only got 1 stitch left on this needle. So sometimes you will have to rearrange your stitches a little bit. And so I'm just going to take a stitch from the next needle and add it to my working needle. And by doing that, it means that when I'm doing the next round and I'm knitting 2 together, it will always be the last 2 stitches on this needle that will be knit 2 together, so I won't have to keep collecting from the previous needle. And that's because we're stacking all of the decreases on top of each other. So if you need to collect a new stitch from another needle, collect it from the next needle in line rather than putting your stitch onto the next needle in line, if that makes sense. Okay, so that is my second decrease round done. My third decrease round, I'm going to knit 3 and then knit 2 together until the end. And hopefully you can see a bit of a pattern here. Next round, I'm going to knit 2, then knit 2 together all the way around. It does get a little bit tricky as you're doing the decreases sometimes to work with such a thick yarn. So you may need to use a little bit more force than usual. Now I'm just going to collect a stitch from the next needle in line so that I can work this knit 2 together. Now this is my second to last round. I'm going to knit 1, knit 2 together all the way around. Okay, now I am on to my last round, and all we do is knit 2 together all the way around, and that will leave us with 4 stitches total. So we've worked our last round. We're not going to cast off. What we're going to do instead is cut a tail that is long enough to weave in, so at least 6 inches or so. And we'll grab our big crochet hook just to help us with this bit. So normally with a hat you'd be doing this with a tapestry or darning needle, but because the yarn is so thick, I think a crochet hook is better. So we're just going to use the crochet hook to pass the tail through all 4 of the stitches. And as we pass them through, they can come off the needles because they're now secure. Make sure you're doing this in the same order that the stitches are in, so that you get a nice kind of ring at the top. So that's the top of our beanie. Poke our crochet hook through the top and just pass this tail down, and then what we have to do is weave in all our ends using a crochet hook. So to weave in ends, we'll turn our hat inside out. Grab our crochet hook. Now we're going to weave in just as you would with any other knitting project, except that we're using a crochet hook instead of the tapestry needle. So we'll find some bumps to pass the yarn through. and we'll make sure we'll go a few stitches in both directions just to make sure that it's really secure. And we'll do the same for this tail, and then we can attach our pom-pom. So my ends are all woven in. Sorry about the lighting, it's just getting a little bit later in the day. I like to turn this cuff, I guess it's the cuff, the brim up just a little bit. I think that looks cute. So you could block this if you like. I think it depends on your yarn, but I'm actually not really convinced that blocking would change this at all or improve it at all. So the next thing that I'm going to do is grab my pom-pom. Now I found mine at Spotlight, which is an Australasian craft chain. The brand is Semco and it's called a Fom-Fom. I guess it's fur pom-pom. Just take the little staple out. And so this one comes with a little elastic loop, which I'm going to use with my length of the yarn that's thinner but the similar colour to my hat. So I'll pass my tapestry needle through and then pass it through the pom-pom, just about halfway. So I've got the top of my hat here. I'm going to poke my tapestry needle through the very centre of the top. You could do it off centre if you like. I'll leave just half of that tail hanging out. I suppose I could have threaded them both through the tapestry needle and brought them both through at once as well. That's something you could do. Okay, and we're just going to weave in this end like we would for a cast off edge or a cast on edge. But I do find that the thinner yarn is just a lot easier to weave in than a thicker one. So if you don't have to weave in a thick yarn, then don't, and it will help the shape, keep the nice round shape of the hat as well. So I'll just trim that. Now I'll grab my tail from the other side. Pass that through the same hole. Pull that as tight as I can so that the pom-pom is nice and snug on the hat. I prefer that colour a lot more to the white against this orangey sort of colour. And weave in this end just the same. And there you go, your little newborn pom-pom hat. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial for this chunky baby beanie. Remember that you can get the pattern for free from my blog, which I will link in the description below. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe to my channel and check out my other designs on Ravelry as well. Happy knitting, bye!